Now we know the content of the new Black Templars codex, I think it's time to take a fresh look at the Black Templars Vigilus detachment, the Sword Brethren, and see what it can do for a Black Templars army. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we try and get the best out of our miniatures on the battlefield. The Sword Brethren have been a Black Templar specific unit for quite a while now. In 8th, however, they're not represented by a specific datasheet, but Games Workshop seems to have implemented them via a Vigilus detachment, and you'll find the rules for them in the Vigilus Defiant book. I thought that now we have the Black Templars codex out, it'd be worth having another look at these options to see if there's any new synergies that present themselves. Now we have so many more options with the Black Templars codex. So without further ado, let's get into the Sword Brethren's rules. So, like all the Vigilus detachments, the Sword Brethren is a detachment that you can include for one command point, and you do this when you're writing your army list, so you can't choose to opt to have it or not just pre-game. It has to be done beforehand, and what you do is you nominate a Black Templars detachment from your army, and then the following units all gain the Sword Brethren keyword: High Marshal Helbrecht, the Emperor's Champion, Company Champions, Captains, and Company Veterans. And what this allows you to do is to access a couple of unique stratagems, a Warlord Trait, and a specific relic. So the Warlord Trait is Master Swordsman. This is a fairly straightforward one. It gives you +1 attack, and hit rolls of 6 in melee mean that you get an additional hit. Now this means as a Black Templar with their new doctrine, you're really going to want those 6s to hit, because you'll get to auto wound and an extra hit on top of that. I believe that the new ruling from the Games Workshop FAQ is that only the one hit will auto wound. The second free one that you get won't count as having been rolled as a 6 for that, so you will have to actually roll to wound with that second hit roll, but still it's a decent melee buff. I guess this kind of competes with the Imperium Sword, the Warlord Trait from Codex Space Marines of +1 strength and +1 attack. I think it kind of depends on whether you want to be hunting vehicles or attacking things where your strength characteristic doesn't matter so much, such as light infantry. The Imperium Sword will generally do you better against big tanks and vehicles, and this will generally do you better against smaller targets, infantry and the like, though obviously it does depend a bit on exactly what your character is armed with. I think this is a reasonable little Warlord Trait, and it's quite nice that you can have this and the Imperium Sword, because you can buy this in with the Vigilus Field Commander stratagem, where you just pay 1 command point to have this as an extra Warlord Trait. You don't even have to use up your Hero of the Chapter stratagem on this one, so that's quite nice. A decent way of making a Black Templars character a bit more fighty. Next we have the relic, which I'm afraid is a little bit underwhelming. It's called the Holy Orb, and it sounds very much like it's trying to be a holy hand grenade from Monty Python, which I think is pretty funny. Basically, you throw it as a one-use grenade, so you have to be within 6 inches of your target, and that target will suffer D3 mortal wounds. For every 10 models in the unit rounding up, you'll get an extra D3 mortal wounds on your target. So say if the enemy unit had 11 models in, you'd get 2d3 mortal wounds, and if they had 21 models in, they'd get 3d3 mortal wounds. The thing is, this is a little bit of anti-synergy really, because things that usually come in 20 plus models aren't generally the thing that you're going to be wanting to waste mortal wounds on. For example, killing 3d3 Orc Boys isn't quite as good as getting 3d3 mortal wounds on, say, a big heavy Imperial Knight or something. So basically it's 1 command point to put some mortal wounds on your target. You do also have to roll to see if the mortal wounds go off in the first place, so you have to roll a 2-up to have that effect go off. Personally, I don't really think this is very worth it. Having a moderate chance as D3 mortal wounds if your character survives to be within 6 inches of the enemy is a bit underwhelming for me. I don't really want to be mispositioning my characters because I want to throw this grenade. I'd far rather be making sure that they get the charge out of Deep Strike or something like that. So I personally wouldn't bother with this relic. Now we come on to the stratagems. Our first is Uphold the Honour of the Emperor, and this is 1 command point, and you use this at the start of the fight phase. You pick a Sword Brethren unit, and until the end of that phase, each time they lose a wound, you roll a d6, and on a 5+, the wound is not lost. So essentially it's like a 5-up feel no pain type save. This could potentially be quite nice to pair with the Emperor's Champion having -1 to hit in the fight phase now, so you could potentially make him very survivable. I'd say this is a reasonable stratagem if you think that this could make the difference between your character living to fight again or the character dying, particularly if it's someone very fighty like Helbrecht, the Emperor's Champion, or a Smash Captain. I'm not sure if this will be quite as well employed on the company veterans, as they're only 1 wound models. This save could be negated if they're hit with anything that's multiple damage, so I think it's probably better on the characters. Could potentially be powerful. I wouldn't use this every single assault phase though. And finally we have what I think is the most interesting stratagem of the detachment, which is Suffer Not the Unclean to Live. Now this one is 2 command points, so it's a little bit more pricey. Again, you pick a Sword Brethren unit from your army, and you add 1 to the attacks characteristic of models in the unit for that phase. In addition, you can reroll wound rolls for attacks made by that unit until the end of the phase as well. Now 4 rerolls to wound is something that's reasonably rare across the whole game. It massively amps up your damage against basically any target that you could possibly attack, and particularly so against anything that's tough that you might be wounding on 5s or 6s. This potentially isn't quite as useful on the Emperor's Champion, as he already has rerolls to wound against characters, but I could see this on a Fighty Captain, Helbrecht, or the company veterans. +1 attack is always handy, but it's really the rerolls to wound that could potentially be worth the 2 command points. If you were using this on a character, you could potentially combine it with Honour the Chapter for another 3 command points, to have a Fighty Captain for example, activate this and then also fight twice with it. For example, with a Teeth of Terror armed captain who's charged into close combat, if you did go the whole hog and spend the 2 CP on this and then fight again, you'd be looking at 18 attacks with that buffed up chainsword. This will be hitting on 2s rerolling 1s, and strength 5 rerolling all wounds. Plus if you're lucky enough to be in the Black Templars Assault Doctrine, you'll be getting auto wounds on 6s, and they'll all be an extra pip of AP. That'll be good for 13 wounds on an Imperial Knight, even if you're not in Assault Doctrine, and this could be even more powerful if you actually give him a weapon that's tuned up to hit heavies such as Thunderhammers. I think that the single place that this could really amp up damage the most though is on that company veterans squad. Say you deployed a squad of 5 company veterans via a drop pod turn 1, they'd have a reasonable chance of making the charge with the Black Templars chapter trait, and if you gave them all say a Storm Shield and Power Fist. On average, if you pop this stratagem, you could be doing something along the lines of 10 wounds to an Imperial Knight, and obviously if you brought them down turn 3 when you're in Assault Doctrine, that'd be even better. I'd say the only limiting thing is it's a bit unfortunate that you can only bring company veterans in max units of 5, which is something I wasn't aware of until recently. This would be absolutely great if you could use it say on Vanguard veterans, but I think it's still powerful if you do manage to get it off on a max unit of company veterans. So is the Sword Brethren Vigilus Detachment worth taking when compared with the opportunity cost of all of the other fun things that you could do with those command points? I honestly think it's quite a close call. It certainly does give you a bunch of extra useful options to buff up your characters in close combat, and it gives you another very nice extra option to do some damage when you get into close combat with that Suffer Not the Unclean to Live stratagem. I think if it could have affected Vanguard veterans, I'd be completely sold on it. But as it is, as you can only affect either single characters or a max unit of 5 models, it's just a little bit less efficient. I could certainly see it being used and doing well, but then I could certainly see you using the command points for other nasty tricks out of the Black Templars and main Space Marine codexes, and doing very well with them too. So for me this isn't an auto-include, but it can be another nasty trick in the toolbox for getting the most out of a melee Black Templars army. So thank you very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. If I've misunderstood any rules or got anything wrong, please let me know down in the comments. And if you can think of any interesting combos for this formation, please let me know as well. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more content similar to this. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.